Let's examine the last 30 days of earthquakes as recorded by the U.S. Geological Survey in the 3D Scene Viewer, which is part of ArcGIS Online. Before we even add the earthquake data, the 3D Scene Viewer is an interactive globe that you can use for visualizing lots of different kinds of data. For example, in the daylight tool, we can look at shadows. We can change the dates. So for example, if I skip up to December, my hypothesis, and rightly so, is that much of the North Pole is going to be in shadow, and it is, no matter which time of day we go to. Yep. So you can look at daily and seasonal variation. Now let's take a look at the layers that we've got, but before we do, you've also got the ability of changing the base maps, so you can look at the world in 3D with a variety of different base maps. Let's go look at some of my favorite landscapes down in southeast New Mexico, the Guadalupes, for example. Really wonderful to be able to do this in this kind of detail. Okay, let's change the base map back to topographic, and let's go back out to the globe. And let's take a look at the layers that we have here. I've added a few layers to this 3D scene. One of them is the last 30 days of earthquakes. So if I look at this, I have extruded the earthquake values to be cylinders. How did I do that? Well, I go over here to my layer, which is this one right here, and notice that I'm mapping on magnitude at the moment. I can change that to be depth or other variables depending on what you've got in your table of data. I've got several things in here. But I can go to counts and amounts 3D and I can adjust the kind of symbol that I'm mapping, adjust the size as I've done here. So my maximum highest magnitude earthquakes are 600,000 meters or 600 kilometers high. I've also got them mapped as absolute height. You can adjust these modes. I've also got the labels on, so you can see some of these labels. They're smart labels, so they don't overpower the map, but at certain zoom scales, you can see the labels. I've got the labels as magnitudes also. I've also got the pop-ups on, so I can click on these different earthquakes and see what's happening. But fascinating to be able to look at these patterns. Take a look at this area right down here. Lots of earthquakes in Puerto Rico this week. You can see my legend right here. I've also got other things on here. So let's say we turn on the plate boundaries, and what's the relationship of plates and plate boundaries to earthquakes? Well, no surprise if you've taken any sort of geography or earth science class where you're looking at the location of plate boundaries related to earthquakes. It makes perfect sense. So lots of activity. The Earth is a dynamic planet, as this and other geographic information systems or GIS tools make very plain. Notice Australia, one earthquake in the last 30 days. Australia has faults, as you can see here, but it is the Indo-Australian plate. It is on the plate. There's no plate boundary that actually goes through Australia. New Zealand, by contrast, is on the edge, actually a subduction zone, so it's a very active kind of a plate boundary. What kind of plate boundary is it? Well, if we take a look at this layer and look at the legend, we can map that if we wanted to on the type of plate, but we have the attributes listed: converging, subduction zone, spreading center, transform, and diffuse. So different kinds of plate boundaries act in different ways across the Earth's surface. Let's take a look at the volcanoes now in relationship to earthquakes. So as you can see right here, lots of volcanoes along the Rift Valley in Africa, but in the last 30 days anyway, very few earthquakes. By contrast, we can go up to a place like Iceland. I still have the shadow on, don't I? So let's drop the shadows, or at least reflect today's date. So we've got looks like two earthquakes in the last 30 days in Iceland. Lots of volcanoes there, of course. So you can see the kind of volcano it is, the latitude, longitude, and so on. This is a shield volcano in this case. So some places, lots of earthquakes and lots of volcanoes. Other places, not the case. Here you've got an offset between the plate boundary and most of the earthquakes because you've got the Nazca plate off here to the west, subducting under the lighter South American plate out here to the east. But fascinating to be able to look at these patterns, relationships, and trends. So some earthquakes offshore, of course. Why do we care about those? Well, obviously for many reasons. One chief reason is tsunamis that could occur as a result of these earthquakes off of the coast. So let's say I didn't like the thickness there. What if I wanted to change that? So if I scroll back up here, I can adjust the sizes, as you can see, of my symbols. I can also do that here. So if I say I don't want them to be as high, I could change it here. But it is a dynamic planet, and these tools like the 3D scene viewer allows us to examine patterns, relationships, and trends in our world. We can also add world cities and find out, based on the patterns, which cities might be most susceptible to earthquake damage. Now, there's a lot of other variables. It's a complex dynamic planet, so things aren't simple. Earthquake damage, for example, has lots of variables associated with it. So we could also add, for example, superficial geology. So if we were experiencing an earthquake in a place, for example, where there was not a lot of alluvium, then we might be better off than in a place like, for example, New Madrid, Missouri, where there's lots of alluvium that is accumulated in the Mississippi Basin. If there was a major earthquake today, like there was in 1811, 1812, it could be a major disaster because of the alluvium. So we could add superficial geology and take a look at this area. As you can see, there's actually a couple of earthquakes that have occurred recently in that area. Fortunately, none of them large. What about building codes? Those also have something to do with damage, of course. And so where are the building codes in place to reduce but not eliminate damage from earthquakes? Given the awareness that the New Madrid has received over the last 20 years or so, there are some building codes in place now in Memphis and St. Louis, whereas in the mid 20th century, there were really virtually none. Again, 3D scene viewer inside ArcGIS Online, and you have the ability to add data, to visualize data, to zoom and pan, to do some analysis. Wonderful tools for instruction and research. Thanks.